I was working the front desk at a backpacker hostel in Melbourne when an American guy stormed up to me, absolutely fuming. He'd just gotten back from a corner store. He slammed a plastic bag on the counter and pointed at his receipt like it was evidence in a trial. They charged me 15 cents for this bag. I looked at him, looked at the bag, looked back at him. Yeah, mate, that's the law here. His face went through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. What do you mean, the law? Since when does the government control shopping bags? I tried explaining that Australia banned single-use plastic bags years ago. He just kept shaking his head, muttering something about small government and basic freedoms. He was genuinely upset. Not about the 15 cents, about the principle. That was my first real introduction to what I'd see over and over. Working in Australian tourism, Americans showing up expecting freedom to work exactly like it does back home, finding out real quick that it doesn't. There was the retired couple from Texas, who couldn't understand why they needed a prescription for cold medicine. The woman looked at me like I'd personally betrayed her when I explained pseudoephedrine was restricted. In America, I can just buy it, because I'm an adult. Or the business guy from California, who got absolutely roasted by a waiter when he tried to customize his breakfast order. He wanted egg whites only, no butter, dressing on the side, gluten-free bread. The waiter just said, "Mate, this isn't Subway. You get what's on the menu." The American sat there stunned, like someone had just told him. Restaurants were allowed to say no. My favorite was probably the college student who walked into a pharmacy, asking for Adderall refills when the pharmacist said, "That's not how it works here." She got this panicked look and said, "But I have rights as a patient." The pharmacist, completely unbothered, replied, "You've got rights in America. Here, you've got our laws." Each time, I'd watch the same thing happen. Americans arriving with this deep, almost spiritual belief that personal freedom means doing whatever they want, however they want, whenever they want, then crashing headfirst into Australian culture, which basically says, "Yeah, nah, we've got rules here, and they apply to everyone." The thing is, Australians aren't less free. We just define it differently. We see freedom as something collective, something that works when everyone follows the same basic guidelines. Americans seem to see it as something individual, something you defend by pushing back against any rule that inconveniences you, and that clash. That's where things get interesting. But that was just the beginning. Over 2 years working in Australian tourism and hospitality, I collected stories that all pointed to the same strange truth. The country Americans think of as their fun, laid-back cousin is actually way more regulated than they expect. And watching them discover that, one bewildered interaction at a time, taught me more about cultural differences than any university course ever could. The speech laws situation happens more than you'd think. Was working as a tour guide at Bondi Beach when I overheard an American dad explaining Australian culture to his teenage son. They were standing near the surf club, and the dad was getting real animated about it. See, this is what's different about Australia versus America. Here they fine you for everything. Jaywalking, littering, swearing in public. It's like a nanny state. His son, probably 16, looked genuinely curious. Can they actually arrest you for swearing? That's what I'm saying. Back home, we have the First Amendment. You can say whatever you want. I debated jumping in. Decided against it 2 minutes later. The dad was yelling at another tourist who'd accidentally bumped into him. The language got pretty colorful, pretty fast. A nearby officer walked over, completely casual, and explained that offensive language in public could result in a fine. The dad's face went purple. "Are you serious right now? You're threatening to fine me for speech? Do you understand what authoritarian means?" The officer, totally unfazed, just said, "Do you understand what public nuisance means?" Then walked away. The son looked at his dad. "So, the nanny state thing was true?" I've seen versions of this at least a dozen times. Americans who genuinely believe that any restriction on speech or behavior is tyranny. Meeting Australians who think calling someone a name in public is just being a bit of a Dickhead who deserves a talking to. Then there's the motorcycle helmet situation. Was grabbing coffee in Sydney when an American couple walked past, wearing matching leather jackets. They were checking out parked motorcycles outside the cafe, clearly thinking about renting one. They came inside, asked the barista about rental places. She mentioned that helmets are legally required for all riders. The guy laughed. Yeah, obviously. We wear helmets. No, she said. Like legally required. You'll get pulled over immediately if you don't. His smile faded. Wait, it's a law? Of course it's a law. He turned to his wife. See, this is exactly what I was talking about. Government overreach. In America, if I want to ride without a helmet, that's my choice. My risk? The barista just shrugged. Here, when you crash without a helmet, our taxes pay for your hospital bills. So, yeah, we made it everyone's business. The wife nodded like that made sense. The husband spent the next 10 minutes ranting about freedom, meaning the right to make bad decisions. The barista eventually just walked away to help other customers. I worked at a bottle shop for 6 months, and the alcohol purchase laws created constant drama. This one American woman, probably mid-40s, came in around 8 p.m. on a Sunday. She grabbed 2 bottles of wine, came to the counter, and I had to tell her we couldn't sell alcohol after 7 on Sundays. She stared at me. What? Sunday trading laws. Alcohol sales stop at 7 p.m. So you're open, but you won't sell me alcohol? Correct. She looked around the shop like she was searching for hidden cameras. This feels like a prank. Are you joking? I'm not joking. So the government decides when I can buy wine? In my own free time? Using my own money? I explained that Australia has pretty strict alcohol regulations compared to America. She listened, but you could see her brain refusing to process it. I'm a grown woman. I'm not drunk. I have money. You have wine. Why is the government involved in this transaction? I didn't have a great answer except, that's just how it works here. She left without the wine, muttering about freedom and government control. Came back Monday morning and bought 4 bottles, probably out of spite. The prescription. Medication thing is huge. I was working at a pharmacy in Brisbane when an American student came in, frantically asking for her ADHD medication. She'd run out and needed a refill. The pharmacist asked for her prescription. She pulled out an American prescription from her doctor back home. I can't fill this, the pharmacist said. You need an Australian prescription from an Australian doctor. The student's face fell. But I have a prescription from a licensed doctor, from an American doctor. It's not valid here. That's insane. It's the same medication, the same dose. Why would I need to see another doctor? The pharmacist stayed patient, explained the regulations. The student just kept repeating, this would never happen in America. I could get my medication at any pharmacy. What she didn't understand is that Australia's pharmaceutical benefits scheme works completely differently than American insurance. Our regulations exist because our system is government subsidized. American prescriptions don't fit into that structure. She eventually booked an emergency doctor's appointment. Cost her about $80. She came back the next day with an Australian prescription. Still annoyed, but at least medicated. The thing that surprised me most was how personally Americans took these rules. Like each regulation was a direct attack on their identity. I watched a guy from Arizona spend 20 minutes arguing with a servo worker about why he should be allowed to pump his own gas at a full-service station, not because it was faster or easier, just because being told he couldn't felt like someone was limiting his freedom. The servo worker finally said, "Mate, I don't make the rules. I just work here," the American replied. That's what everyone says in countries that aren't free. He was talking about gas station procedures. I was working as a receptionist at a law firm in Perth when we hired an American attorney for a 6-month contract first day. She showed up at 7:30 in the morning. The office was completely empty except for the cleaning crew. She called me, confused. Is there a holiday I don't know about? No, why? Nobody's here. Yeah, work starts at 9. Long pause. I thought Australians were hard workers. We are. We just work 9 to 5. She arrived at 8:45. clearly uncomfortable with being on time instead of early. Then, at 5 p.m., she watched everyone shut down their computers and leave. She stayed until 7, working alone in an empty office. Next morning, my boss pulled her aside, asked if everything was okay. If the workload was too heavy, she looked confused. "No, I'm fine. Why? You stayed 2 hours late yesterday." "That's normal for me. I usually work until 7 or 8, my boss frowned. "We don't really do that here. If you're staying late regularly, something's wrong with your workflow." The American attorney looked genuinely lost. In America, staying late shows dedication. It shows you're committed. Here, it shows you're inefficient, or that we're overworking you. You could see her whole worldview shifting. She'd spent her career believing that working constant overtime proved your value. Finding out Australians saw it as a red flag completely threw her. The casual employment situation catches Americans constantly. I worked at a restaurant where we hired an American backpacker as a server. Smart guy, good attitude, learned the menu fast. 3 weeks in, he showed up for his shift and found out he wasn't rostered. He asked the manager about it. "Quiet week. Don't need you, but I'm scheduled for 3 shifts this week." "Not anymore. Check your roster." His face went pale. "You can just cancel my shifts? Without notice? You're casual. That's how it works. This is legal?" The manager nodded. "You want guaranteed hours? You need a permanent contract." Casual means flexible both ways. The American spent his lunch break researching Australian employment law on his phone. He couldn't believe what he was reading. In America, if you're hired for certain hours, you generally get those hours unless you're fired. Here, casual employment means the employer can cut your hours whenever business is slow. He asked me about it later, still processing. How do people live like this? How do you budget? I shrugged. Most people try to get permanent positions. Casual work is usually temporary, but there's no job security. They could just stop rostering me and technically not even fire me. Yeah, basically. And this is normal? People just accept this? It's the trade-off. Casual work pays more per hour. Permanent work pays less, but you get guaranteed hours and benefits. He looked at me like I'd just explained water that flows upward. The concept of employment flexibility going both directions completely contradicted his understanding of worker freedom. The sick leave thing is massive. I had an American co-worker at a call center who got the flu. Proper flu, not just a cold. She called in sick 3 days straight. When she came back, our supervisor pulled her into a meeting. She came out looking shaken. "They want a medical certificate." "For being sick," I nodded. "Yeah, if you're out 3 days or more." "I have to prove I was sick?" "That's the rule. In America, I'd just use my sick days. Nobody questions it. Here, sick leave is protected by law. But you need documentation if you're out multiple days." She got increasingly worked up about it. "So I have to go to a doctor when I'm sick, pay for an appointment, just to prove to my employer that I'm actually sick? How is that freedom?" What she didn't understand is that Australian sick leave is way more generous than most American jobs. We get 10 days per year minimum, and it accumulates if you don't use it. Many Americans get 0 paid sick days, but because our system is more regulated, it requires documentation. She eventually went to a bulk billing clinic, got a certificate for free, brought it in, but she complained about it for weeks. The principle bothered her more than the actual inconvenience. The union situation always surprises them. I was working at a university when an American professor joined the faculty. Brilliant guy, taught engineering, very friendly. About a month in, he asked me why so many staff members had union stickers on their laptops and water bottles. "A lot of people here are in the union." "That's allowed?" I laughed. "Allowed? It's encouraged. The university encourages union membership?" "Yeah, unions negotiate our pay and conditions." He looked uncomfortable. "In America, that would be seen as troublemaking. You keep your union involvement quiet, or you might not get promoted. Here, being in the union is completely normal. Management expects it." He processed this for a moment. "So Australian workers have collective bargaining power. and employers just accept it. It's the law. Unions are part of how workplaces function. And you don't see that as losing your individual freedom to negotiate? No. We see it as gaining collective power to negotiate better conditions for everyone. That conversation happened 6 months into his contract. By the end of his year in Australia, he'd joined the union himself. Told me it was strange, but he understood why it worked here. Said he wished American workers had the same protections, but knew the cultural resistance was too strong. The mandatory superannuation thing blows American minds. It's basically forced retirement savings. Your employer has to contribute 9.5% of your wages into a retirement fund. You can't opt out. The money's locked until you retire. Americans hate this on principle. The number of times I've heard, "It's my money, I should choose what to do with it," is impossible to count. I was working at a public hospital emergency department in Adelaide, doing admin, when an American tourist came in with a badly sprained ankle. She'd slipped on some rocks at a beach, needed x-rays, bandaging, crutches. We processed her, got her treated, gave her the crutches. She was sitting in the waiting area when she asked me, "Where do I pay?" "Nowhere." "You're done." "But I need to settle my bill." "You're a tourist with an emergency injury. Bulk billed, no charge." She stared at me. "That can't be right." "It's right. I need x-rays and crutches. That's like $500 minimum." "Not here. Emergency care is free." She pulled out her phone and started Googling. Convinced I was wrong, found articles about Medicare covering emergency care for international visitors in certain situations, still looked suspicious. So Australian taxpayers are paying for my medical care? Yep. And nobody has a problem with this? I shrugged. "Would you rather we let injured tourists just suffer?" She didn't answer, just kept shaking her head. 2 days later, she posted on a travel forum about it. I saw the post because someone shared it at work. She'd written, "Australia's healthcare system treated me better as a tourist than my own country treats its citizens." I don't know what to do with this information. The unemployment benefits situation catches Americans off guard constantly. I had a friend who worked at Centrelink, which is our social services agency. She dealt with an American guy who'd been working in Australia on a temporary visa, lost his job when his employer went bankrupt. He came in asking about unemployment support. She explained he wasn't eligible as a temporary visa holder. Only permanent residents and citizens could claim benefits. He was upset but understood. Then he asked, "How much do permanent residents get?" She told him the current rate, about $280 per week, plus rental assistance if eligible. His whole demeanor changed. "Wait, that's it? That's like $40 a day." "Yeah, it's meant to be temporary support while you job search. In America, unemployment can be way higher depending on your previous salary. Here, everyone gets the same rate. It's a safety net, not income replacement." He sat there doing math on his phone. How do people survive on that? They usually don't for long. It's deliberately low to encourage quick re-employment. But you also get health care, subsidized medications, job search support. So the amount is lower, but there's more wraparound support? Exactly, he looked conflicted. That's actually kind of smart, but also kind of controlling. My friend told me that conversation stuck with her because it showed how differently Americans and Australians think about safety nets. Americans want higher individual payouts with less oversight. Australians accept lower payouts with more structural support. The gun control thing is obviously massive. I was working at a rural bed and breakfast in Queensland when an American couple checked in. Older folks, very polite. From Wyoming, we got talking over breakfast. The husband mentioned he missed his morning shooting routine. Shooting routine? I asked. Yeah, I usually shoot targets on my property before work. Relaxing start to the day. Can't really do that here, he smiled. I know, I looked into it. Your gun laws are intense. We had a mass shooting in the 90s. Banned most guns after that. Hasn't been one since. He nodded slowly. I heard about that. Port Arthur. Yeah, national tragedy. changed everything. His wife jumped in. We respect that. Different country, different laws. The husband agreed but added, I will say, though, not having the right to own a gun feels strange. Like something's missing. But you feel safe here, right? He thought about it. Extremely safe. Safer than home, honestly. But it's a philosophical thing. In America, we see gun ownership as a fundamental freedom. Here, we see not getting shot as a fundamental freedom. He laughed. But it was uncomfortable. That's fair. It's just hard to explain to someone who didn't grow up with it. Gun ownership is tied to independence, self-reliance, protection. Giving that up feels like giving up part of your identity. His wife added, but we've noticed that Australians don't seem to feel less free without guns. You just define freedom differently. That was the smartest observation I'd heard an American make about Australian culture. We don't feel oppressed by gun control because we never connected freedom with firearms. Americans do deeply. And that's a cultural difference that can't really be reconciled. The voting laws always create interesting conversations. Cici learned was working at a community center during an election when an American exchange student asked me about the ballot. Is voting actually mandatory here? Yeah, you get fined if you don't vote. That's insane. Why? Because freedom includes the freedom not to participate. Forcing people to vote is authoritarian. Is it? Or is it ensuring everyone has an equal voice? She looked frustrated. In America, voting is a right. That means you can choose to exercise it or not. Here, voting is both a right and a responsibility, like jury duty. But what if I don't want to vote? What if I don't feel informed enough? Then you can submit a blank ballot. You just have to show up. So I have to show up to not vote? Basically, she shook her head. I'm sorry, but that's ridiculous. That's the government forcing participation in democracy. Real freedom means being left alone if you want to be left alone. I understood her point, even if I disagreed. Americans see freedom as the absence of obligation. Australians see it as collective participation. Neither is inherently wrong. They're just incompatible. Worldviews? The interesting part is that Australian voter turnout is above 90%. American turnout is usually around 55%. Voting means everyone's voice counts, but it also means people vote who might not otherwise care. In America, only motivated people vote, but millions are left out due to barriers and disengagement. Different trade-offs, different definitions of freedom. The best story I ever witnessed was at a barbecue in Darwin. Someone invited an American military contractor who was in town for work. Super patriotic guy. Very confident. Clearly used to being the loudest person in the room. Someone mentioned Australian healthcare. He jumped right in. The problem with socialized medicine is the wait times. You guys have to wait months for basic procedures. An Australian nurse at the barbecue set down her beer. I work in emergency. We triage based on urgency. If you need surgery now, you get it now. But what about elective procedures? Then you wait, because someone else needs the resources more. See? That's rationing. That's the government deciding who gets care. The nurse smiled. But it wasn't friendly. And in America, insurance companies decide who gets care. At least our government isn't trying to make a profit off your cancer. Dead silence. Everyone was watching now. The American tried a different approach. I just think people should have the freedom to pay for faster service if they want to. We do. Private health care exists here, but everyone gets baseline care regardless of money. That's not less freedom. That's more freedom for people who can't afford insurance. Another Australian chimed in. Mate, I broke my leg skiing last year. Ambulance, surgery, hospital stay, physio. Total out-of-pocket cost was about $60 for the painkillers. How much would that cost you in America? The American got quiet. Probably $20,000. Maybe more. And you think we're the ones without freedom? The contractor didn't have a response to that. He wasn't a bad guy. He was just confronting the reality that freedom means different things in different contexts. In America, freedom often means protecting individual choice, even at the expense of collective welfare. In Australia, freedom often means ensuring everyone has access to basic needs. even if it limits individual choice. Neither country is objectively right. They've just made different trade-offs based on different values. Working in Australian tourism taught me that Americans aren't wrong for valuing individual freedom above collective responsibility, and Australians aren't wrong for prioritizing social safety nets over personal autonomy. They're just different cultural frameworks that produce different societies. The Americans who struggle most in Australia are the ones who see any regulation as tyranny. The ones who thrive are those who realize that living in a society means accepting certain restrictions in exchange for certain benefits. And the stories? They never stop coming. Every week brings new examples of Americans discovering that the freedom they assume is universal, is actually culturally specific, that their normal is someone else's strange, that the world is bigger and more complex than any one country's definition of liberty. Some find that liberating, others find it threatening, most land somewhere in between, confused but curious, annoyed but learning. And honestly, that's the most human response possible.